Recently, President Biden announced that through executive order, he was going to reduce everyone's student debt by up to $20,000. What effect should we expect that to have? Welcome to The Conquering Truth. I'm Dan Horn.
I'm Jonathan Sides.
I'm Charles Churchill.
And I'm Joshua Horn.
So as we near the midterm election, politicians tend to do things to try to win votes. And I think it's fair to say that President Biden announced that he was going to forgive up to $20,000 in student debt for people that had loans from college. And I think that affects about something like 45 million Americans, mostly in the younger demographic, which tends to vote more Democratic. But so it will have effects there, and it will have effects for the election, is what his hope is, I'm sure. But what other effects should we expect to see?
I mean, so there's the speculation about political effects, but there's just the basic financial effects that you should expect when you say that you're going to eliminate and forgive a large amount of debt like that. You're going to see a rise in inflation, and we'll talk about why that could happen. But you should also expect that the cost of college and university attendance is going to rise. There's just absolutely no way that that's going to happen, and it's going to rise faster than the rate of inflation, because there's going to be the expectation of, well, you did it once, you're going to do it again, and money's free and cheap, and it just comes like that. But then, on top of that, it's just further entrenching the financial illiteracy of a nation that thinks that you can forgive a debt without balancing the scales. And there's spiritual implications of that we're going towards. It's one of the reasons I'm interested in doing this episode.
I think, another thing, and we'll deal with all those three, but another thing is that I don't think that President Biden's going to get the boost, even politically, that he expected. Because there were a lot of people that immediately went, but wait a second, I paid off all my debt, and now you're going to forgive their debt. And so the person who ran on being the unifier, the person who does speeches, even though he does very divisive speeches saying that he's trying to bring unity, I think that in the end this will further divide people. And it's really interesting to me is that the people that it's going to divide, he was clearly politically, you look, and it would appeal whether he thought it through or not, but he's a politician. He should think it through. If he thought it through, it looks on superficially at least that it's going to appeal to his voters. But it's also very against the people that they consider to be the core of the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party has not been majority white for a long time. And the reality is that far fewer blacks as a percentage have college debt. Far fewer Hispanics as a percentage have college debt. He has very much attacked with this what has been for a long time considered the political base of the Democratic Party.
And for, you want to talk about battleground states, talk about all those Rust Belt states where you have a skilled blue-collar class that by and large aren't going to be people with college educations, but are probably financially literate enough that they understand they're going to be paying for this now.
Right. Somebody has to pay for it. You can print money, which is what they'll do, but somebody in the end will have to pay for it. And it's a big transfer of wealth from the people that only have high school education to the people that have college education. I was looking at statistics today, and I think that the person with a high school diploma, when they graduate, they make about $30,000. The person with a college diploma, when they graduate, they make about $52,000. So they're already starting out making $20,000 more a year in their first year. But yet, all of a sudden, you're going to give those people an additional $20,000 and not expect the person who's making $30,000 to very much resent it.
I mean, as someone who almost 30 years ago looked at college and said, I didn't think college was necessarily worthwhile from a financial point of view, and decided not to go to college as this actual partly financial choice, other reason, I'm not that thrilled that I have, that I've now have some percentage of college debt as something that I have to pay off. I mean, so there's not just people who went to college and paid off their debt. There's the people who said, I don't think it's worthwhile, because they're turning around and the argument is that college wasn't a good financial choice for them. And I don't think that's something that you all of a sudden just could have figured out now, because there are a lot of people who saw it over the past 30 years and actually chose not to invest in it. And so, I mean, it's pretty skewed.
When you read Proverbs, it warns in Proverbs 22:16, he who oppresses the poor to increase his riches, and he who gives to the rich will surely come to poverty.
Ouch.
I mean, and as a nation, what President Biden did is said, we're going to take $20,000 from the relative poor, even though we're richer than most countries in the world, the relative poor to give to the rich. And God warns and says they'll come to poverty. And so we shouldn't think, and we're going to talk about ways that this works out financially and why that would be true. But we just need to recognize God says it will be true because it's judgment. And the fact that we're willing to say that, I sit at this table, and you didn't go to college, Charles. Joshua went to college and paid for everything as he went because he didn't go to college. He stayed home and went to college. I paid off my student debts. I don't know where you are in the mix, but
I went to 2 years of community college because it was more affordable, and then I worked through the summers in order to pay for 2 years of 4-year school.
And so, all of us have either paid the debt or didn't incur the debt in the first place. And so all 4 of us are having to pay money to people who aren't going to pay their debts. And this is we can all afford it, maybe. No, we can all afford it. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that are poor that are actually going to be hit by it pretty hard. And they're actually going to increase taxes, inflation, all these other things. They're going to actually consume money. And so they're basically robbing the poor to pay the rich. This is not something that pleases God.
So, but you hear that they're forgiving debt. So, but the people they're forgiving debt from, then aren't they the poor people? Because they have thousands of dollars of debt to be forgiven.
Well, first of all, if they made the right purchase decision by purchasing the college education, then basically every purchase decision that you make is to say the value of the money that I have is less than the value of the thing I'm going to buy, or you don't buy it, right? And so they said that college education made them richer, even though they went in debt for it. Now they're turning around and saying, it made me poorer, so you have to pay off my debt. Well, then you were a fool. You shouldn't buy something that you think is worth less than the money that you're buying it with.
But so we're talking about debt forgiveness, and we're talking about people are going to be upset about it. So why would people be upset about it? Because it's not like the government is sending them a check for $20,000. So how is this going to hurt people who don't have college debt?
Well, part of it is that effectively they are, even though it doesn't show up that way, because where all of a sudden that person was sending $1,000 a month or whatever it was, or $500 a month, they stop sending that $500 a month. And so what you've done effectively is increase the income of other people, which is going to have other problems like inflation and things. But everybody else is going to resent it because they're going to say, because I made a different choice, I don't get that $500 a month that person who took the student loan gets.
And, it's one of the things that was already happening, because I think with COVID, for a long time, they shut down the student loan payment. So there were all these things that were having impacts on the economy.
It is still shut down.
It's still, so, for a couple years now, it's been shut down. So, and that's something, that's, at least the news I read, that's not a number one headline, but it's something that, especially over time, has a big impact.
I mean, when you start getting into the details of the loans as well, I mean, you can take out a loan and you can use it to purchase part of the money to purchase a car for some of your transportation issues. And so there's this part of it where it's not just, I paid for this education. It's, I got they got the loan and they used the loan for different expenses, and now you're forgiven $20,000 of it. And other people just got a car to they didn't get a particular loan. There wasn't somebody handing out a loan for them to get the car just to get to work or to do anything that they needed, or if they wanted to start a business or they wanted to do something, anything else. And so there's this irregular thing. And I do think part of it is it goes to the idea of mercy. And I think part of it is the church has a flawed sense of mercy. And so, there's this concept of if a person stole from someone and they came before a judge and the judge said, I'm going to have pity on this person and I'm just going to say, you don't have to pay that money back. A lot of people would say that's merciful, but really he's just said that the person who was stolen from is never going to get his money back. And usually in most cases you get more than was stolen from you is what you should be getting. And so he's just literally he's furthered the robbery against this individual, so there will be no justice for him. And so there's this idea of we just have this skewed sense of justice because when President Biden says, I feel bad for these people, so we're going to give them $20,000, and he calls it mercy, there's something that just pulls at people because they go, I know you're robbing from somewhere else. You are stealing from somewhere else. This is just fundamentally flawed. And so there's just it strikes at the heart of our understanding of justice. And so when you look at something that's unjust, that's one of the fundamental things that causes resentment in a society.
And one of the things with this too, you were talking about how, people go and buy cars. Well, one of the things that is very normal is to cover your living expenses.
Right.
And let's be serious. Most people understand that when you go for a 4-year degree, you spend 5 years because of the amount of drinking you do, the amount of chasing of the opposite sex. I mean, college isn't that much about studying. So basically, when you then say we're going to write off $20,000, you're not writing off $20,000 that they use for great academic purposes so that they could become better people and smarter. And no, you're writing off $20,000 so that they could have a 4 or 5 year vacation. And so if you're a guy out there that's doing steel work, where you're going into a factory that's 120 degrees every day, you're sweating next to molten metal, or working on a construction site, or you can pick anything, and you're like doing actual hard labor, and you go, and they get paid for a 4-year vacation?
Right.
Why do they get paid to have a 4-year vacation and I have to work?
Right. I work all day so I can go out and drink at night to forget about the fact that I have to work at the the steel mill, as opposed to going to I had to go classes. I had to write this horrible paper. Do you know how hard that is? And he's thinking, I'd love to know how hard that is.
Yeah, but I don't think we want to be saying either that there's no sympathy due to the people who are under, say hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt for some people, because that's a real thing, and I think, and that's.
But again, I think even that. So there's a graph that we have here. So if you look at this graph, you see, and you can use either one, but let's just use the blue for it, that a high school graduate over a lifetime will on average make $1.54 million. That's their whole lifetime earnings. Somebody that has a bachelor's degree will make 2.43, I think it says. That's an extra $1 million that they'll make over their lifetime. And you're giving the $20,000 to the person who's going to make $1 million more rather than the one who's going to make $1 million less. And most of the college debt actually isn't held by people who have bachelor's degrees. Most of the college debt is held by people that have graduate degrees. And so a lot of the people that have bachelor's degrees, if they were in a realm that they could actually, a lot of them get grants, they get other things. So a lot of the people that have debt, a lot of them have some debt, but somebody that has $20,000 in debt, they usually went for a graduate degree. The person who gets a graduate degree, it's 3.05. In other words, they make $1.5 million roughly more than the person who didn't go to college, but yet you're transferring money primarily to them. That just seems very unjust, and that's who you're shifting the money from.
Were there limits on who got the money?
It was an annual salary of $125,000, which is, pretty high.
Right.
And you think that's the first 10 years of work, because a lot of them they just write off everything after 10 years anyway.
You're talking about the terms of the loan. A lot of these government loans, the terms of those loans, where as long as you pay a certain minimum for 10 years, at the end of the 10 years, the government will eliminate the debt entirely. Before President Biden did anything differently, that was already in force.
Right.
But now you'll say, we're going to give you an additional $20,000 during that 10-year period to help you pay down the minimums that you have to pay.
Right, that the minimum you have to pay then is less during those 10 years, and that at the end it all gets written off.
But, we have the averages, but, and on average, those people are going to make more money. But when you get to specifics, there's people who got a graduate degree and, underwater basket weaving. That's probably not a graduate program. But, whatever the ridiculous graduate degree you get is. And then
those guys are actually doing fine. The demand for underwater basket weavers is through the roof right now.
But there's a lot of people out there who got this degree and now they're working at Starbucks and they have a bunch of debt. And it's a burden to them. Now, is it going to bankrupt them? Is there going to be forgiveness for it, after the 10 years? But it is still a real burden in that time. And it's something that, you look at why do they get into this debt? Well, it was probably some bad decision making. But the way they got that loan was because the federal government put this loan program in place where the free market was not giving out loans for this because it realized it's, crunching the numbers, we're not going to get paid back if we give you this loan. That's why they had to put the federal student loans in place because the market said this isn't worth it. And so, but now the government is saying it is worth it. And then but it actually wasn't.
And I think you have to be really, really clear because, there's a certain constituency that is far more likely to choose gender studies than to choose electrical engineering, which pays back. I mean, the reality is that all the woke degrees, quote unquote, all those woke degrees, they're worthless in the marketplace and nobody would fund them. And so the reason you used underwater basket weaving, but how about gender studies? How about black oppression studies? I mean, you have real degrees that people are going and studying these things that the market would say, this is stupid.
History.
Well, if it's actual history, that would be a different thing. Because there is a place for a few people to make money in history, like five.
Not meant to get the college for history professors.
But there is a huge shift towards those degrees that don't matter and that have no long-term benefit. But what they help is the Democratic Party, because there's a reason why the Democrats are pushing for the loan forgiveness, because the people who need loan forgiveness are not the guy who's going to be a Wall Street banker. That's not who needs the loan forgiveness. It's not the guy that has the Harvard degree on law school. The guy who needs the loan forgiveness is the guy who got a degree in black studies or something.
Well, or let's be honest, we're talking about resentment. They're doing it because a whole bunch of their constituency would resent them for encouraging them to go and get these degrees if they didn't give them forgiveness. You said I should go and get this degree. You said this is something that's worth going to get. And now I have all this debt and I can't pay it back. Where's my, and so there's this part of it where it's a handout to their constituency because they did encourage them to go and take on this debt to go into these areas of study.
And what is the primary constituency of the Democratic Party? Academia. That is their primary constituency now. They're trying to train everybody through a woke academia, through the very liberal, through the very, you look at schools now, you have to have, in order to be a professor at a university, you have to have your plan written up in almost every university, every major university in the country, and most of the small ones, including the private Christian ones. You have to, when you apply to be a professor now, you have to have a written explanation how you're going to do diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and how you're going to further it. Not just how you support it. You have to have a written plan to say how you're going to further it in order to become a professor. Academia is about now moving forward the identity politics. That's its primary motivation, and that's why you get such a high percentage at most universities are very liberal. Since the 60s, 63 I think is where they started the government funding of colleges, there's been a huge shift in what a lot of these degrees are. And there's been a huge shift in cost because the person who wants a degree in philosophy that maybe never be able to make money in philosophy, it used to be reasonably priced. But because there's such a flood of money, everything's just priced through the roof so that these things that could be done out of interest, now they become very impoverishing.
Right. Steven Pinker, a very liberal professor, the author of, I think, The Language Instinct, who's done a lot of linguistic study. I think he used to be associated with Noam Chomsky. He recently tweeted about, there was one of these, a fairly prestigious journal, scientific journal. He said, this is no longer an actual journal. And he shows a section in their standards, and it's basically exactly what you're saying. Any findings that would cause there to be any consideration that some group could be considered to be better than another group based on actual data will not be considered. Anything that would cause some group that's been showed status to be thought negatively of. Basically they basically said science is political, and they just and he's basically going. he's, like I said, he's not conservative by any means, but he's looking at it and going, this is just the absolute negation of academia.
Open inquiry is cut off at these particular avenues.
Yes, I mean, they basically just destroyed, they basically said you can't use the Bayesian theorem in any of your findings because it's going to come back and show you that some of these things are true. He goes, there's no way to avoid it. He goes, these things are true. What do you do? So, it's here.
And so we shouldn't, the level that this is pandering to the Democratic base is just, it is an incredible level. And you can see that it's the Democratic Party that's been, and the more liberal you are, the Democratic Party, the harder you've been pushing. And Elizabeth Warren's really been pushing this, and she's saying, how can you be so stingy to only give $20,000? How can you be like this? Well, if you look and say her primary, the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, that's what the academia has been pushing for a long time, and this is basically sop to them. This is just handing them money. And so this is how they're trying to buy votes. The problem is there aren't enough voters in that constituency to win elections.
There's also the charm of wanting to be more like Europe, where you can look at various different countries where a university degree is quote-unquote free. You pay for it by paying really high taxes. But
right. Everybody pays for it, including those who don't go to university, to the point where, like, I have a degree in computer science. I think in Germany almost nobody gets a degree in computer science because it's, everybody does internship because it's just not worth it. The universities are terrible. So they say that they're free, but they still all come to the United States, don't they? So it looks like he's trying to do this, and the Democratic Party for a long time has been trying to do this, to buy votes through these academic programs of a certain constituency. But what I think they've started to do is, the Democratic Party, I think this is going to fundamentally cause some changes to who their base constituency is. Because like I said before, it used to be something like 38% white, and it was mostly black and Hispanic, if you take it, and obviously there's other minorities. But what they've done now is trying to help the elite whites that are part at the expense of the blacks and at the expense of the Hispanics. And I think they've started to buy their own rhetoric, so to speak, right? So the blacks that they're talking to is not the guy who's working at the steel mill. The Hispanic that they're talking to is not the Hispanic that is doing construction. The Hispanic they're talking to is the guy that went through one of these academic programs, and he's saying all the Hispanics are people of colors, and they need to have the right terms, they need to have the right pronouns, and so that I think that they've gotten themselves in a case where they're talking to each other, and they think that they're actually talking to representatives of these minority groups that are a big part of their constituency, but they don't actually represent it anymore, which is kind of what Donald Trump came in and drove that wedge to go, look, more blacks, or the unemployment rate amongst blacks is better with me than it's ever been before. It is with Hispanics. And so to kind of separate the academic Hispanic from the more general, class of the Hispanics in terms of where they are in work.
Right. They're kind of caught in a political echo chamber in a sense.
But at least one area where they are talking to their base, as you look at the statistics of the breakdown between men and women going to college, and it's skewing heavily towards women.
Yes.
That tends to be a more democratic, especially when you talk about young women.
Yes.
So if you have young women who have significant numbers, significant debt loads, then you're talking to your base right there. You just don't quite realize you're alienating other significant portions of your base.
Right.
But you also have the thing of, well, if a program for every social group, so maybe this one hurts them, but they're also, if they're poor, they qualify for all these other things that help them. So, how does that balance out, and do they understand how that balances out?
Right. And what you've done is you've said if you're poor, but what they're losing is the lower middle class that isn't eligible for all those benefits and at the same time didn't incur all this debt. The common working man, so to speak. That's
right.
who
that they've always been a champion of.
That's all that's what they've always said, that this is who we're championing. And they're kind of walking around going, how are we losing these people? How is the polls now saying that the Republicans might get 25-26% of the black vote? How might they get a majority of the Hispanic vote? They're like wandering around going, how could this happen? And it seems to me it's pretty clear how it could happen. Right, you were mentioning that women being a key constituency in it, I mean, this has been true for a long time, is that there's always a gender gap between those who vote for Democrats and those who vote for Republicans. I mean, I think the gender gap goes back to Ford, I think is where it started to be established, if I remember correctly. But here you see on this chart where before I was talking about men, with women, here you see all of their total lifetime earnings is significantly lower because, I mean, part of it is the fields that they choose, and part of it is a lot of them don't continue and work that long. I mean, most women end up having children or are out for children more, and so their lifetime earning is simply less. But, you know, here you're looking at that, and some of them, they could say, yeah, I need this student debt paid off because I'm only going to make $1 million more than the person with the high school diploma.
Whenever your entire time in the career might be 10 years. I mean, you know, it's like if you're only going to, if you're, as a man, you're looking at, I'm going to work in this field for 30 years, and the fact that your first 10 years you're going to have a reduced income, that's not as big of a deal. Whereas if you're going to work for 10 or 15 years, and your first 10 years are going to be greatly reduced, that starts to be a lot more significant percentage of the total amount of time you're going to be in the field, in the force at all. And
right.
So, I mean,
and you look, and some of the statistics that I've seen, it's like almost 60% are women now in colleges. I mean, it's shifting dramatically and rapidly. And when you look at that, a lot of those, they don't get nearly the return off a college degree typically than a man does. It's just the reality of how life works.
Well, and part of the reason that there's that shift is because men are realizing that college is not appealing to them. It doesn't make financial sense. People are coming to that conclusion more and more. For many people, not everybody, but for many people, college doesn't make any financial sense. And then for men in particular, you get to college and they tell you being a man is not good in every possible way.
And being a white man is even worse.
So, you know, so you are seeing men who are just, they're not buying college anymore.
Right. They're making a different financial decision.
And that's and what I'm saying is not a political statement. That's just the facts of men are not going to college at the rates that they used to.
Right, which is, you know, a good thing. You know, there's a lot of people out there saying, you know, with the trades, there's this big dearth of not enough people who want to do the trades. The prices are going up because it's hard to find people, and so this is a way that, you know, to actually keep the lights on, keep the farms moving, all these things. If men are all going to college at the same rate as women, that's going to be a problem.
And the reality is computers tend to automate out the white-collar jobs much faster than the blue-collar jobs, meaning that, you know, initially there was a lot of automation that got rid of some blue-collar jobs, but those, because there's financial incentive in your manufacturing to automate something if you can. There's been automation that was 30 years ago. But now they're starting to automate, I mean, the white-collar jobs. You can have somebody that can do as good of a job in terms of, you know, psychoanalyzing somebody with a computer. You can just come up with a big enough database of responses and have them chat with somebody as opposed to a person, right? I mean, you can automate away a lot of those things a lot better than you're going to be able to automate, you know, building a house.
And blue collar, I mean, with those types of jobs, they've probably hit peak automation because you've actually seen jobs that they moved into automation, they weren't as effective, and they've moved back into manual. And so, I mean, I would just, my suspicion is, unless there's some sort of major shift in there where they figure out some way to solve something, which
and they're
I think
working
is very
to
unlikely.
to do 3D printing of houses and stuff, but that just seems more like a game than that's very practical in many cases.
Right.
And as you convince people to take more and more debt, we have to recognize this is promoting immorality. In Psalm 37:21, it says, "The wicked borrows and does not repay, but the righteous shows mercy and gives." I mean, when we're promoting to a class of people that they should take loan forgiveness, we're promoting immorality because the wicked borrow and do not repay. And to not repay that debt is actually still sin. Even if somebody says, you know, oh, you're so poor, we're going to forgive you the debt, you still have a duty to repay your debts. And to take debts that aren't repaid, and, you know, I'm sure we're going to talk about this when we talk about inflation because of this, is you're encouraging people to take more debt in the future. So there's a real promotion of immorality that will have a real impact on our society.
Just to clarify there, you were saying if a person tells you don't need to repay who doesn't have the authority to tell you don't have to repay. I mean, if you actually owe somebody a debt and they tell you they'll forgive you the debt, you don't have to repay that person.
Which is very different than a third party saying, I'm going to steal from somebody else and pay the debt for you so that you don't have to repay, which is what the government's doing.
But, just to spread the blame around, it's also wicked to entice someone to borrow money when they're not going to be able to repay. And
Absolutely.
I think there's a, to a large extent that has been done with a lot of people. And so,
And let's be clear, what their solution is not going to solve the problem. I mean, that's part of it is if you look at something and you go, college costs more than it should, so let's forgive 20,000. I mean, if you go back and you say we're going to forgive $20,000 of debt towards paying that college, you're not going to do anything to reduce the cost of college. In fact, college is going to go up in expense. You should expect that. The value of college is not going to increase. And no one is going to say we should stop going to college and incurring this debt because you've told them that there's a very good chance that you'll be willing to pay for them. So, I mean, in the end, I agree completely with you, and the solution will make everything worse. It will make every single part of the current situation worse.
If they came to a political agreement in Congress saying, we're going to forgive X amount of student debt and eliminate the federal loan programs, I'd say that's a great idea.
Right.
We're going to take all the endowments away from the colleges and use it to pay down student debt because they basically lied to a lot of people about how useful the degree was. That might be just.
Right.
And then you solve the problem too, because then all of a sudden the colleges will have to reduce their expenses.
Provided that the colleges committed fraud. Provided that the college,
Right.
You need to prove that they committed fraud. That's very important that you actually prove that they committed fraud. But in the end, if someone committed fraud, that should be dealt with, and they should.
Part of it is fraud that was committed by the government.
Right.
Because the government said that this degree is worth it, that the government's saying we'll loan you the money, that the government is pushing people to do it. But the colleges aren't innocent either because their response was not to go, well, we're giving a good value, so we're going to keep the value. Their response was, oh, the government's paying more money. Let's raise our rates.
Yeah, and if they were saying, we're going to forgive you this money because we lied to you, they would demonstrate that by changing or eliminating the loan program. But they're doing the same thing. They can't say that it's because these people were lied to.
Right? So I've got another chart here. This is comparing what the inflation has been in the colleges compared to what the inflation has been in the general economy. And so the first two columns in each one is the blue and the orange are what the private school costs and what it would be. The orange is what it would be if it just increased at the rate of inflation. And the gray and the yellow are what public school costs are because they're always cheaper. Or they have been since the land-grant universities many years ago. And so you can just see by the time you get into into now that the cost of college is it's more than twice what it would be if it would have just increased at the rate of inflation. So why is it increasing so fast? There's this idea that if you pour money into something, that the cost of it won't go up. But that's because we've rejected all the most basic understanding of inflation. If you have X number of dollars chasing Y number of goods, the price of the good is dependent on X and Y, right? The ratio of the two. If you double the amount of money without increasing the number of colleges, guess what? The price of all the colleges will double. That's how it works. That's basic inflation. And so by the government pouring all this money into the education sector, all it's done is double the amount of money there. So the price of every education doubles.
And so what the rosy thinking is college costs too much. People are having to pay too much out of pocket. Families are paying too much. How about the government step in and the government will cover part of that so families have a smaller burden? And what happened was not that, maybe in a very short term that happened, but over the long term, there's always a correction where the colleges say, look, we know how much families can afford. And then the government's willing to spend X amount through grants, loans, etc. Add those two things together, and that's going to be the cost of college for this year. And if you just say, well, that burden on the families is still too high, let's put more government money in it, the colleges are just going to run the exact same calculation, and it's going to be higher because it's just more and more government money going at it. And you look at a chart like this and just recognize there's no good and service anywhere in our economy except possibly healthcare and pharmaceuticals that you can find a chart.
The same issue
exactly
that has so much government involvement in it.
There's nothing else where the rate of inflation of a particular good is as high as this, except for possibly pharmaceuticals and medical care.
And the other thing you can be sure of is the value of college has not gone up.
It has not gone up at this rate.
Right.
If college were worth twice as much, then this rate increase would be worth that. But it hasn't.
And part of it is you have to understand where this money's going. Because it used to be, it was something like 5% of the expenditures of a college were for administrative overhead. It's now 45%. The money doesn't go to professors and hire more professors. It goes to hire more administrative staff. It goes to hire more of the college people rather than the people who are teaching. So you haven't increased the quality of the college because the people who are teaching are pretty much the same. Maybe you've increased it some, but not very much. The vast majority of the money.
Director of pronoun
right,
adherence.
Because now you don't have your DEI officer. You have your DEI committee, a whole staff of people that are supposed to chase this stuff around and can confront people. And most universities have a group of people doing this. I remember back in the 70s. I do remember in the 70s.
Well, you didn't take drugs. You have a lot better chance of remembering the 70s.
I thought that was the 60s, but I was too young then. But in the 70s, I used to play tennis with a guy who was the administrative officer for Dickinson College. And this was in the 70s, so this is like on the far left part of that graph. And he said when he retired from that position, they built a building and hired 45 people to replace him. And that was the first decade after this stuff happened. Why did they do that? Well, the admissions group is the people that goes and gets all the loans from the government. So all of a sudden, what one person was doing, now you need 45 because they can get more money from the government. And so that's where the money went. That's where the staff went. That's where the increase in tuition went. I mean, like the school that I went to, there were people there that, if they were paying for their education, if they thought about it, they'd recognize that the education wasn't worth it for them. They didn't have the background. They didn't have the what was needed. If you're having to do remedial math to go to a high-level engineering school, you're not going to get a good ROI, and most of them drop out. The only reason they were there is because the government is saying, well, we need to prefer certain classes to try to get equal races there. And so somebody who would have gone to the university, I'm thinking of my roommate, who he would have gone to University of Virginia and he would have been very successful. He was a very bright young man, but he's put in a school that he's promoted to that he never even heard of calculus when he was in his school that was in downtown Richmond. He came from the slums. And then you walk into a school where everybody has calculus, you're just so overwhelmed that how can you possibly do it? And if it was his money, he wouldn't have. It was a horrible financial decision, but because the government had got involved, it made a young man not have a college degree that would have had a college degree and would have had raised himself up in his standard of living compared to where his parents were. I mean, part of the reason it's saying that is we have to recognize there's a tremendous human cost here with what's happening. How many lives have been ruined by, instead of making somebody into a productive person, they convince them to do gender studies? I mean, the whole gender confusion stuff and all this is because of this government funding. This idea that you're going to take people who are in the lower classes and that you're going to raise them up to a level that's beyond their abilities because they don't have the training, they don't have the background. I'm not saying they don't have the aptitude, but you take them and you put them in a place where they can't be successful. That only happens because the government's involved. So many lives have been destroyed by this, and so many people that would have been very capable contributing members of society that would have raised up a group of people get destroyed by this stuff. I mean, it's just horrible. It's just evil.
And there's at least two other vectors that happens on as well. It's number one, you just take somebody out of the workforce for 4 or 5 years who has no business being at college.
Right.
And they should have gone right into a trade where they could have been making money right away. So there's that element to it. But then on top of that, you have the number of people who, because of the debt load they have because of the financial burden coming out of college, and then not having a degree where, or the sort of job where they're getting a return on that, they decide we can't afford a family.
Right.
And so you have all these people who are deciding not to have children or delaying having their children, having smaller families because we can't afford it. If my decision is paying back my loan, or that might be the one good thing that comes out of this. That might be. And that's saying everything about this is bad. But somebody might say, hey, you know what? Now I can finally afford.
God can still use it for good.
God could still, of course, God can use it
for good.
Absolutely.
And part of the good that he's using it for is the idolatry of education in our country. And hey, there's a lot of countries it's a lot worse than. I mean, it's you go to Colombia and it's insane. You go to Nigeria and the worship of education, the idolatry of education is just insane. I mean, they're just the idea that education can save. But the more, like you were saying before, more men are going, wait a second, this isn't salvation. And there'll be other people that go, because the prices of college is going to go up. And there'll be more people that go, this isn't worth it. This isn't a path that actually is helpful.
And there's no way that it's sustainable. I mean, at some point, the system's going to collapse, or it's going to reorganize, and people are going to look at more alternative higher education systems than the standard four-year programs and the standard graduate programs. They'll find other ways. And
I mean, all those, like Joshua did his online. And there's other ways when you remember what happened, right? The reason that the universities system started, I mean, there was a couple theories, but one of the main theories is that books were incredibly expensive, and the university was a way that you could gather books together so that people would come to the expensive books. And so they'd come to the books to study because that was you gathered the books in one place. And then... You
mean back when all the books were handwritten prior to the printed press? We're talking like 1300s.
1200s, 1300s, where like some of these schools started. And this is where the university system comes from, is it comes from the idea that books are so, it's 2 years' wages to own a book, right? Well, if you're going to then want to go read 50 books, you either have to work for 100 years to get the 50 books, or you have to go someplace where 50 other people are going to read them, or 100 other people are going to read them, so that you reduce the cost per person. And so that's the source of the university system.
It made financial sense.
It made absolute financial sense. But
for a very small number of people. Relative to the population.
Relative to the population was an incredibly small number of people.
Right.
But now you look at it, and all those books that all those people said we have to go to, they're all online now. You don't need to go anywhere.
Most of the classes are even online.
So that expense, no longer can college even sell it. What they have to do is sell that you got a degree from this school. So it's a marketing thing, right? This school is worth something. So it's about the name of the school. And the only value of the name of the school isn't their ability to teach, because, hey, you can go, MIT lectures are online. If you want to just learn stuff, you can go learn stuff. It's not hard. You can find it. That's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to get that stamp that you have a degree from Harvard. And the stamp, the hard part of the stamp is not getting the degree from Harvard. The hard part of the stamp is getting into Harvard. And you'll make a lot more money if you have a degree from Harvard. Not because Harvard's education's great, but because they're really good at picking the smartest people.
And because, in a sense, what the colleges are doing is it's sorting. It's sorting people into places, because there are universities or there are businesses that are going, I need to hire someone who fits this thing, and this university, like you said, RPI was a good, if you were going to be an engineering manager, there were places who said, we're going to hire people, we're going to hire them, they're going to do some work, and we're going to move them into management. This is where you hire. It was a hiring pool. And so
if you want a practical scientist or engineer, you go to RPI. If you want a theoretical one, you go to MIT. If you want a lawyer, you go to Harvard. If you want a politician, you go to Yale. And it was all about sorting and saying, we know these people have a certain level of capability. It's not the education they receive. It's that you've chosen and said, these are a selection of people. And we were also able to put enough pressure on them to show they're not going to crack under pressure. And so that's what they're selling. Well, there's other ways to do that. I mean, our system to produce that is incredibly expensive to do that sorting. And that's all effectively that they're doing. Jordan Peterson, I was listening to a clip by him the other day, and he said, the greatest predictor of success is not what school you went to or anything else. The greatest predictor of success is IQ. That if you're in the 95th percentile for IQ, you'll be very successful almost all the time. and the rest of it doesn't matter. And what happens is that the Harvard's good at finding the people that are in the 99%. These elite schools, that's what they do, is they find the people that can prove that they have the capability to, number one, they have the intellect, and number two, that they've done individual things to prove that they'll use it. So if you were a member of the football team, they don't care. If you're the captain of the football team, that's worth a lot more. If you're the golf team, that's more than the football team, because then you prove that you could do stuff yourself. And so they're looking and they're sorting to say, we can figure out who's successful because all we really care about is what they'll give as the alumni, how big our endowment will be.
In reality, it's the intersection of the IQ and the ability to actually go and do things.
Right.
Because in the end, without both of those.
Well, I mean, what Jordan Peterson says is that all the statistical studies, and this is from him, I haven't looked at anything, but he says all the studies show 95% percentile of IQ. That's the most important thing. IQ is the best predictor of success.
That's interesting.
But to get into Harvard, you need more than IQ. You need to, because now you're not talking about 5% of the people. You're talking about 0.001% of the people.
Right.
And to refine that, it takes more than just IQ.
Right. That's interesting.
It actually takes drawing.
I know there have at least been some studies that have shown that a high IQ without those other things, they've tracked a lot of people that had high IQ that didn't have those other indicators, and they weren't that terribly successful. I mean, and it may be,
it's still the average of
it may
success.
be measurable, like in the sense of they didn't die of poverty. I mean, they, you know, and so that may be all they're measuring is.
But anyway, so when you look at this enormously expensive system that we have, that's effectively just showing perseverance and sorting of people into different categories, we spend an awfully lot of money to produce that. I can tell you I went to a pretty good engineering school, well-known engineering school. And in the end, I learned more in 3 months on the job than I did in the engineering school. And I knew more than my professors after working in the field for 3 months because I did that while I was in college.
But there's a sense in which certain industries are happy to let the university do that sorting system for them. And other people are just like, hey, we'll take anybody. But certain are happy to let somebody else spend a whole bunch of money and a whole bunch of time sorting people out. And that's what they care about with the degree. They don't really care about, do you know anything? Because they're going to teach you everything.
Absolutely. And I'm just saying that I don't think $500,000 is what's necessary to do that sorting. We've gone too high.
Fair enough.
I'm not saying that industry should do the sorting. That's ridiculous. That's not what they do. You do need somebody, that man that I was talking about that did admissions. After he retired, he went around and consulted with companies because his job was to figure out who would be the most successful. And so if they were hiring people, if they were hiring an executive, they would hire him to come in and interview all the executives. That's how my father met him, as he was interviewed when he was interviewing to be a CFO for a company. And that's, because he had that skill set. And I'm just saying that it shouldn't require the university to find people that can sort like that, because what you really need is the skill set to sort, because the industry typically is not going to have it.
But, for many years they got by without having most people going to college to sort things for them. So, most industries got by without, the college sorting it for them.
Right. The way they sorted before is you have a factory floor that has 1,000 people. You put everybody in that 1,000 people, and it will sort itself really quick. Because, it does. That 3 months, it was sorted at the company that I was at. By 3 months, I had 2 people reporting to me. 2 people that got paid a lot better than I got paid, but they couldn't tell me what to do, and they were willing to hear me tell them what to do, so it worked out that way. But you know what I mean? In companies, it sorts. Like when we hire somebody, frequently I hire somebody thinking, well, they'll have this position. It changes because as soon as you figure out what their real capabilities are, you know what I mean? The business environment sorts pretty quickly. So, as we talk about these things, it's really important for us to recognize just when the government gets involved with things that it shouldn't be involved with, it really distorts them and it really twists them. I think your point, Jonathan, was, we're at 1.6% or 1.6 children per woman. We're a nation that's killing itself, as are most of the European nations. Japan's worse. There's worse places. But we're a nation that's literally killing itself. And I do think that the college programs have a significant thing to do with it. If you spend 4 years doing something and then you get out, you meet a man, you say, I want to have children, I want to raise the children, and you go, but wait a second, I have this college debt, and then what will people say? I spent 4, 5, 6 years going to school, and now I'm just going to throw that away for a child? And, all these debts, that, it's not just the money that you owe, it's also the time that you've invested and the time that you've said this thing is very valuable, which is why I went into so much debt. And so you just can't throw that value away.
I mean, go ahead.
So if you haven't noticed, we started talking about the college loan forgiveness, but it turns out that's the tip of, that's bad and all. That's bad for the country, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot beneath that causes a lot of problems.
It's the tip of a growing iceberg.
Right.
Is what we're saying is that the whole college program, the financial costs of college are so high, and this is actually not making it better.
Because you were talking about this thing has to grow until it explodes. The loan repayment assistance programs are like unbelievable. What these are
the ones that already exist, you mean?
The one that already exist.
Right.
But if you wonder whether this will increase the inflation, you have to understand how it works. So in these silly degrees, I'll call them that, gender studies, social services, and then in some real things where attorneys want to go and be in a public defender's office, or they want to go and be a teacher. After 10 years, usually their debt will be wiped out. If they take things, especially if they do government work, their debt's wiped out after 10 years. And there's also a limit of how much of their discretionary income they can spend. So this would be after housing, after food, after other things. They say, okay, in this market, it's this cost, and then this is what your discretionary income is based on what you make, and then you only spend 10% of your discretionary income. Okay?
On what? 10% on what?
To pay back the loan.
Okay.
That's the max.
So 90%,
90% of your discretionary income you keep.
Is yours, okay.
And so somebody that makes $100,000, if they're living in New York City, they might only be paying, say $50,000 would be their cost of living, then $50,000. So they might pay $5,000 a year towards a student debt. So colleges went, wait a second. And especially law schools do this. They go, since you have these people that go into the public defender's office, and there's people, especially if they want to be politicians, they like to go into the public defender's office, or they like to go into politics or into the government because that's a good basis for which to become a politician. So what about if, here's what we do. What we do is, because it doesn't matter, right, to the student who knows that their loan's going to get written off. It doesn't matter if they owe $50,000 or if they owe $50 million. They know in 10 years it's going to be written off. So a school can go to them and say, our education used to be $200,000. But here's the deal. We're going to make our tuition $400,000 a year. But what we're going to do is take some of that money and we're going to do a loan repayment assistance program. What that means is for those 10 years, we're going to pay whatever the government says that you have to pay as 10% of your discretionary income. And we'll pay it all. So you will pay nothing for college. We're going to increase our tuition, but it won't cost you anything and it'll all be written off.
But the college gets $400,000.
They only have half that conversation with that student.
Right. I'm just saying that the whole thing. But so what they do is they can raise their tuitions to whatever level they want because they know the students will never pay it.
The cost is basically opaque to the consumer of the
because
products.
what they're saying is, and they are saying to the student, don't worry how much money you borrow because your amount that you have to pay back per month is capped. And we're going to pay whatever it is.
Their tuition amount they can set is only limited by the limits that the government puts on the loan program.
Right.
So it would be like you go to the hospital to get, and they say, well, don't worry about your premium. We have a premium payment program. We're going to pay your premium using the insurance company's money so that you come to our hospital.
Right. Only there's nobody negotiate, like in an insurance company, the insurance company is negotiating the rates with the hospital to try to get the rates lower. There's nobody negotiating to try to get the rates lower because the government, especially the Democrats, they want to see academia get bigger because that is their primary constituency. That is who they're pushing for and the people that follow after what the professors are saying. So these programs, this isn't something that's just made up. These programs are in effect now, that they're already doing this. You go to Boston University Law School and they'll talk about their whatever it is, LRAP, that they have this program that it will cover all your expenses. You'll never pay anything back. And so when you have created a system where there is no limit to what gets paid, you know all these people are going to continue to just increase and increase and increase and increase their tuition to the point where the system blows up because they're all competing with each other.
And now you're doing it on the other end.
This loan forgiveness is really that, right? I mean, this loan forgiveness is going, we've created this monster, and so let's try to deflate the monster a little bit by giving more money that will actually inflate it more. But because they don't understand basic inflation, which you can tell by everything that they're doing, they have no understanding of basic inflation.
Well, I think that's unfair to these often very smart people. They understand politics and saying some of you aren't going to be able to go to the college you want to go to because we failed to negotiate. We said no to the college. They want to say yes to everyone. And so it's not, I don't think it's fair to say they don't understand, because I think there's people there who understand exactly what they're doing.
Oh, they understand that. I'm saying the inflation in the general in the general economy. I'm not saying that inflation the schools, they understand all that. I completely agree with that. They completely understand that. But they think raising interest rates and stuff will actually reduce inflation. It doesn't.
I mean, let's just be really clear. This is the level of long game they're playing. 60 years ago, they paid for certain economists to go to college who would end up now telling them that if they continue doing this, there will be no negative effects.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
This is the type of long game.
Right. This is how President Biden gets 70 Nobel Prize winning economists, or not 70 Nobel Prize winners, but that 70 economists that are worldwide renowned economists, which are all from academia, to write things that are blatantly false.
Right.
That
so
are
they
just
can
ridiculous,
believe their
just
own lies.
Basic economics. You increase the number of money chasing after the same goods. It has inflation. Where in that is interest rates? Nowhere. How did the interest get beaten in the 80s? How did it get beaten in the 80s? The only way that you can beat inflation is either you stop printing money, which means you shrink the size of government. Nobody's going to do that. The only other choice is to increase the production. So what did Reagan do? He cut regulations. He cut taxes on capital so that he would increase production, and inflation went away. You'll never get inflation away by raising.
Inflation decreased.
So it
wasn't painful anymore.
Right. But you'll never get rid of inflation by the Fed raising interest rates, because it's not dealing with any problem that's related. Because what will you do? You'll increase the cost of capital, which means you'll reduce production. You'll continue to print money. So what will happen to inflation? It'll go up.
Shrink.
Because you have more dollars chasing fewer goods. That's inflation. And so what all these things that they're talking about with the Fed, none of it's going to work, because it's not how it works. It's really basic. This isn't like rocket science. This is really basic things that people have known for a long time.
But it sounds kind of tinfoil hatty, like it's grand conspiracy, and it's just
politics.
But they're also, they also understand how the inflation works. They're just trying to make it not as painful. Well, I mean, they also understand, the pool of money that's out there, and that if they're adding to it, prices will go up. But the thing, they're just saying that, well, we can make it so that the benefits we get from it are better than the cost to people.
Maybe, but I mean, I don't see what they think interest rates, and they've talked about this since Keynes, that interest rates will solve the problem, and it never has. But that's what they're going to do in a week or two. They'll raise the interest rates by another 3/4 of a point or a point, and it's not going to help. It's not what does it. Now, they might drive the economy into a recession, in which case the gas prices will come down, which is probably why they've come down already.
Right.
Is because we've been in a recession the last 2 quarters. We've had negative growth. So guess what? Oil always comes down when you have negative growth. But it doesn't solve inflation.
But of course, it doesn't solve inflation. But if it's harder to borrow money, then people are spending less. So you do have some help in it. It's not solving the root cause.
But the problem is it also reduces the amount of production. And the way to solve inflation is to increase production. That's why the inflation wasn't as bad.
The way to
under
solve
Trump.
inflation is to stop printing money.
Absolutely.
I know you know. I'm not, but I mean,
The way to slow inflation.
Right. Stop false weights and measures is the way to fix. Right, because that's the basic problem with inflation is false weights and measure. And they say the basic problem with inflation is production. Well, that's not true.
Right. It is. I mean, and this is one of the things. I mean, you will see, and I know people say they lie. I mean, their basic answers are lies. They are often
and
the
I think they
exact opposite
frequently
of the truth.
say them with great sincerity and belief. It's not that they're going up there and going, I know this is a lie. A lot of the people, they don't know it's a lie. They think this is going to work, even though it's been proven over and over again that it doesn't work. And their answer 100% of the time is always the same. We didn't do it enough. If we would have raised the interest rates faster, it would have stopped it. If we would have spent more money, it would have stopped it. They always come back to the same thing. It worked. It just didn't work enough to stop it because we didn't do enough of it.
I mean, it honestly, what it reminds me of when you look at the politics, it reminds me of the story in the Old Testament where the two kings are saying, should we go to war? And they say, is there a man of God we can inquire of? And he says, oh, there's one, but he always speaks evil things against me. And then it shows this picture in heaven where God is saying, how can I cause them to go and do this foolish thing? And one of the spirits before God says, I'll go and put a lying spirit in all of his advisors. And then it comes back down to the scene where the man of God comes and he tells him, this is going to be doomed to you. But then you see the false advisors, and one of them has like made horns of brass that he's come and he's put and he's using it and he's telling him, you'll go and you'll drive your enemy. I mean, he's looking at him and he's telling him absolute lies. And like you said, with absolute, with
he probably heard it from a demon. He
right,
thought he heard it from God.
With vigor and with and this is, I mean, it hasn't changed. This is where we are. We've got computers in the background. You've got people standing, they've got degrees on the wall from the universities we've been talking about that are causing the problem. And they're saying that this will work. And it is lies. It is absolute lies.
And I want to push on that, but I want to push it in what might seem an unexpected direction. Because you have somebody, we've basically been saying a man cannot just come out and say, your debt is forgiven. The debt just sort of magically floats away into the ether, and there is no more debt, and now, it's steady state before. That's not the way God made the world. God made the world where every debt's paid. Mm-hmm. Gravity happens, water finds its level. This is just one of the basics of the world that God made. And check your Facebook feed, see what people are saying about this. See if they say, well, no, don't you believe in a God who forgives debts? Yes, we believe in a God who forgives debts because Jesus Christ paid those debts. When the debt of our sin is forgiven, it's not just that God said, oh, okay, I'm no longer holding that against you. He's saying, I'm no longer holding that against you because everything that you owed me, and you owed me everything, was paid by somebody innocent shedding his blood on your behalf. Everything balances. The world that God created was such that things balance. And how did we get to this point? I mean, like every podcast we do, we're going to go back and we're going to blame the church. And we're going to say the church has bad theology. And
we're going to blame ourselves.
We're going to blame ourselves. The church has had bad theology where we haven't emphasized the fact that debts get paid in order for them to be forgiven. We want forgiveness without payment. We want the forgiveness of the debt without looking really hard at what was the cost of getting that debt paid. What did it really cost God and Jesus in order for them to forgive the debt that was owed to God Almighty?
And to think that he would have forgiven the debt of somebody who just wants to keep being a greater debtor. Right? I mean, that's the problem in the church right now, is that people say, oh, Jesus Christ paid for my sins, so now I can go sin all I want. Well, no, Jesus Christ paid the debt for those who he gives a heart that says, I don't want to keep increasing my debt. And yes, I am. I am still a sinner. I'm going to increase my debt, but I want to stop. That's the heart that he gives to those who forgive.
I mean, that's the root of that verse that we read from Psalms where the wicked borrows and does not repay. This is what your entire life is until you repent and Jesus washes you with his blood, is you are incurring debt debt that you have no intention of repaying until God calls it in, and you spend the rest of your life in hell. But if that's where you are, then you're living the same sort of fantasy that we've been talking about with politicians who think, oh, we can just make all this debt go away with no financial consequences.
And I mean, I want to go back to where early on I was talking about our misunderstanding of mercy. So I want to make Dan be the judge. I'm the thief, and I stole from Jonathan. I stole $10,000 from Jonathan, and we go into the courtroom, and we gave the example of if Dan looked and said, I'm going to forgive Charles's debt, he steals from Jonathan. If he just goes, I'm going to pay Jonathan back, what he does is he sends a person out back into the world who says, I can steal and get away with it. But here's what Jesus Christ does. Jesus Christ says, I'm going to pay you everything that you're owed. Now I own your debt. Dan owns my debt. He's going to take me as a slave into his household and teach me to not steal. And this is Jesus Christ sending the Holy Spirit into the world. And this is why the church has a fundamental misunderstanding of what mercy is because if the judge just paid you, that's not merciful to me. I'm a thief, and you need to
and it's definitely not merciful to other people that you're going to steal from.
Right.
You've been merciless.
You send me out unchanged, and the law falling to me having to pay you back would be good for me. So if you want me not to pay the debt, you have to do something to me. And that is and we've eradicated that from the gospel. We don't understand what mercy is. The church usually preaches the first one. You just forgive the guy. At best, they go the second way where he pays the other person back. But they almost never talk about the sending of the Holy Spirit into the world, that you become Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ. Paul, a slave of Jesus Christ, a slave of righteousness. That's lost. And God says, I make you my slave, and you will serve me, and I will change you so that you steal no more. And if you lose that, you lose the gospel, because that is part of what Jesus Christ died on the cross for.
And so the education that universities are giving now is an education that, in the end, is missing the most important things, right? Because fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. And if you do all these things where you go out there and you seek all this other knowledge and you seek to know about, gender dysphoria or confusion and all this other garbage that they teach, or if you go there and you learn about engineering but without fearing God, in the end, you'll just be a rich person whose life is destroyed by your sin. And the reality is that somebody has to pay the debt, like you said. And if Christ doesn't pay it, then you'll end up paying it in this world and in the world to come. We've been talking a lot about how, he can't just go, it's paid. And the thing is that the one's a single point transaction, meaning that everybody will see their 10, 20,000, whatever they do, the applications and stuff, it'll disappear. But the reality is that $500 billion that he's talking about, or $1 trillion that he's talking about giving away, we won't see it. But in the end, what will happen is the money will not come into the treasury that would have come into the treasury. And so the debt of the United States is still going to go up by $500 billion. It doesn't disappear. It's still going to go up. It just will take a year for it to go up rather than it immediately. So on the one hand, they're going, you'll see this, and it won't affect the debt at all. But it will. It will just be dragged out more.
Because that's the way that God made the world. You cannot eliminate debt. You can pay debt. You can move debt around. Somebody can buy your debt. But the only way that you eliminate debt is by paying it. Mm-hmm. That's it. And if the church would get this right, then maybe the economists would too. But why would we expect the economists to do any better than the church?
Not directly related to what we just said, but I think we've been talking about debt for over an hour, and we should at least mention that the Bible doesn't have a lot of great things to say about debt. It says that the borrower is slave to the lender. So a major part of this whole thing is our idea is that debt is great, debt is amazing, debt is how you succeed in the world. That's not the Bible's. That's not the principle the Bible teaches. The Bible teaches you shouldn't really be loaning out money to people all that much, I mean, we could do it probably an hour on debt, but, you shouldn't be borrowing money, probably shouldn't be lending money. So, you kind of have this there's this mentality that plays into this that's pretty broken.
Or at least you have to go at it with the calculation of, is it worth it for me at this time to be a kind of slave?
Right.
Because the return down the road is better. Is it worth it for me at this time to be buying slaves? And I know that language is just jarring for anybody, but that's what the Bible says. If you are a lender, you're purchasing something from somebody. They are, in a sense, they are your slaves. And, is that kind of thing the sort of country you want to be part of?
And, we think of buying a slave means that the owner of the slave has no obligation. But when Christ buys us, he incurs an obligation. When any man bought a slave, he always incurred an obligation. And so when we loan to somebody, and I've done this before where I have not fulfilled my obligation to that person the way that I should have, because you really create an obligation on yourself when you loan money to some people or somebody. I mean, I've done it where I've done it to be able to say to them, the wicked borrow and do not repay, so you should understand where you stand before God. But when we think about it, that the master, the person who's the lender, he has a real responsibility to make the borrower better than he was, because he's to use that power that he has over him for the good of the servant, not for his harm, but for his good. And the government never does that. When you become a slave of the government, it doesn't help you. It always hurts. You look at the welfare programs. All they do is create greater damage. You look at, all these student loans, they create greater damage. There's so many, the small business loans, they create greater damage. You just watch, and because the government is a lousy slave master, it always creates greater damage wherever it goes. And so we should just be really cautious not to say, hey, I want the government to be my slave master. Our society wants to tell you that the only way you can be successful is to go out and borrow a lot of money to get a college degree. But you're borrowing it from the government. You're borrowing it often for things that don't have that great of a return of investment. Christians should really be asking themselves, what is worth selling myself for? Especially if you're a real Christian and Jesus Christ has bought you, why do you think you need to go and sell yourself to the government for a degree? So many Christians send their children to colleges, and they incur huge amounts of debts, and they do all kinds of foolish things that have no return because they forget what God says. God instructs us on these things. That's why we spend so much money on education, because we keep false weights and measures. That's why we have so many people that have so many difficulties in their life, because they've sold themselves into slavery. And it's very sad, but the solution isn't to just say, let's just pretend like the debt doesn't exist, or in reality have other people pay it. That's not the solution to the problem. The solution to the problem is to fix the system. Thanks for joining us.
This has been The Conquering Truth, a project of Reformation Baptist Church. If you found this helpful, you can visit us online at theconqueringtruth.com and subscribe here or in your favorite podcast app. Thanks for watching.